All right, strap in, everyone. We're going deep on this one, diving into Adorno and the Frankfurt School.
Oh, great choice.
And you've really outdone yourselves this time with the sources.
Yeah, it's a real mix.
It is. We've got articles, book excerpts.
Even some letters in there.
Letters, yeah. So this is way beyond the Adorno 101. We're going right for the good stuff here.
Definitely, yeah. And it's amazing how Adorno's life, it's almost like a map of the 20th century, all the turmoil, Nazi Germany, exile, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
All these things, they're not just abstract events to him.
I was just thinking that, reading through the...
It really shaped his whole way of thinking, yeah.
Yeah, it's like he's not just doing philosophy, from like an ivory tower. He's trying to figure out how to think after seeing the absolute worst of humanity.
Exactly. And he doesn't come up with any easy answers.
Not at all.
What you see in the Frankfurt School, and especially with Adorno.
Yeah.
It's this urge to not just analyze society, but almost to diagnose it. Like, how did we get here to this point?
Yeah.
Can't we even fix it?
Yeah, and they're doing it from a Marxist perspective, right?
Right.
But I'm also seeing from the sources that they were quite critical of how Marxism was actually playing out in the Soviet Union.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the Frankfurt School, they were never about just towing the party line or anything. Yeah. I mean, they were founded in 1923. But already by the 30s, you have people like Max Horkheimer, who was super close to Adorno. Mm-hmm. And they were basically saying, hold on, this Soviet-style communism, this isn't really the utopia we had in mind.
Right, so they're trying to find a new way, a new path to like a society.
Yeah, exactly.
But while Europe is kind of like falling apart around them.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly. No pressure at all. And then Adorno comes onto the scene.
Yeah.
But he doesn't start off as a social theorist or anything?
No, not at all. Music was his first love. I mean, he was a composer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, heavily influenced by people like Schoenberg.
Yeah.
These really avant-garde figures.
Right, pushing the boundaries of what music even is.
Exactly.
And that's where I see, even at that early stage, the beginning of that whole thinking in constellations thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the idea that to understand something, you can't just look at it straight on. You got to gather all these seemingly random pieces.
It's like detective work.
Yeah.
You're looking for clues, these hidden connections.
Yeah.
And for Adorno, this wasn't just some intellectual game.
Yeah.
He was trying to make sense of a world that felt like it was falling apart,
Okay, I'm with you there. But before we get too deep into the whole constellations thing, I do want to rewind a bit.
Yeah.
Because the sources mention some pretty heavy hitters influencing Adorno early on. People like Luca Geodix, Bloch, Krakauer.
Oh, yeah, big names.
Yeah. Who were these guys and what were they bringing to the table?
Well, they were all kind of pushing the boundaries of Marxist thought, each in their own way. Oh. Like Luca Geodix, his book, History and Class Consciousness.
Yeah.
He was saying you can't really understand history without looking at the struggles of actual people.
Okay.
The working class.
Right.
It's not just about these abstract economic forces.
Yeah.
It's about lived experience.
So it's adding like a human element to the Marxist analysis?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you have Bloch. He was, I'd say, a bit more of a utopian thinker.
Okay.
His spirit of utopia.
Yeah.
It's all about the power of hope, the belief that a better future is possible, even when things look really bleak.
Right.
And this really resonated with Adorno,
yeah,
especially given the time they were living in.
I can see that.
So you've got this rigorous analysis from Luca Max's, this hopeful vision from Bloch, and then where does Krakauer fit into this?
Yeah.
Well, he brings this really fascinating method of looking at philosophy almost as a reflection of its time.
Okay.
He's saying you can't just analyze an idea in a vacuum. You have to understand the historical and social forces that shaped it.
So even these big philosophical ideas, they're kind of like products of their environment. They're not these timeless truths just floating above it all.
Exactly. And this really struck a chord with Adorno, especially with his background in music.
Yeah.
He saw music as being a reflection of these societal forces, not just an escape from them.
Yeah.
And this idea that everything is interconnected, it becomes like a recurring theme in his work.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that, definitely.
Yeah.
So we've got Marxism, the power of music, the importance of this historical context. It's all swirling around in Adorno's mind.
Yeah.
But then, like you said earlier, everything changes with the rise of the Nazis.
It's a turning point, a huge one.
Yeah.
The Frankfurt School, they get scattered.
Yeah.
Their whole project gets disrupted. And then tragedy strikes with Walter Benjamin, another key figure, and close friend of Adorno. He ends up taking his own life while he's trying to escape, the Nazi persecution.
Right.
And this has a profound impact on Adorno.
Yeah, it's like their whole project, this critique of society, the search for a better future.
Yeah.
It almost gets like crushed under the weight of this historical catastrophe.
It does. And I think out of this devastation comes one of Adorno's most, unsettling ideas.
Yeah.
This famous line that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric.
Yeah.
He's really grappling with the very possibility of art, of beauty, in a world that's seen this kind of unimaginable horror.
Yeah, it's not just about poetry. It's about the role of art and culture and any form of expression, really.
Absolutely.
In the face of, pure evil.
Yeah.
How do you create beauty when the world itself feels broken?
And that's a question that haunts Adorno's later work, for sure.
Yeah.
How do you find meaning? How do you even think in the shadow of something like Auschwitz?
Yeah. It's like he's saying the world has been damaged, permanently.
And that damage is reflected in everything.
Yeah.
From our art to our politics to just our very way of being in the world.
Absolutely. And this leads us to his concept of the damaged life.
Okay.
Which he really explores in Minima Moralia.
Right.
Which is this collection of aphorisms and reflections on everyday life under, late capitalism.
Okay, before we get into the damaged life, though.
Sure.
I do think we need to talk about Benjamin a little bit more.
Okay.
Because the sources you've given me really emphasize that his friendship with Adorno is so important, both personally and intellectually.
Oh, absolutely.
So what was their relationship like? And how did Benjamin's ideas actually influence Adorno's thinking?
Yeah, great question.
So last time we were talking about how Walter Benjamin's death really impacted Adorno.
Yeah.
And how that kind of ties into his idea of the damaged life, which I got to say, I'm finding both fascinating and a little unsettling.
Oh, yeah, it's a powerful concept. Yeah, because it feels so relevant to, our world today,
Absolutely.
So Benjamin himself, from these sources, I'm getting that he was this really unique thinker.
Yeah.
Almost an outsider, even within the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, he was kind of on his own wavelength.
Yeah, his work was all these, it's fragmented, full of these unexpected juxtapositions.
Yeah, he was piecing together meaning from these broken pieces of modernity,
Yeah, and it was through him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That Adorno really developed that whole thinking in constellations idea.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Benjamin's Arcades project, which he never actually finished, is a perfect example.
Okay.
He was obsessed with these 19th century Parisian shopping arcades.
Yeah, the ones with the glass ceilings.
Yeah, exactly. These glass-covered walkways full of shops and cafes.
Right.
And he saw them as these microcosms of modernity.
Yeah.
These spaces where you could see the dreams and anxieties of a whole era reflected in the architecture, the commodities, even just the way people interacted with each other.
It's funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
Because when I first read about the Arcades project, I was okay, that sounds kind of niche.
Yeah, I get that.
But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wait a minute, this is actually really relevant to how we live now.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we're constantly surrounded by these curated spaces, online platforms, where our desires and anxieties, they're being shaped and manipulated.
Exactly. And that's what's so brilliant about that whole thinking in constellations thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding connections between things.
Right.
It's about understanding how those connections actually reveal the underlying structures of power. These hidden forces that shape our lives.
Okay, so I'm seeing how Benjamin's influence helped Adorno develop this method of thinking, this way of piecing together fragments to see the bigger picture. But how does that connect to the damaged life?
Okay, well,
what does he even mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so for Adorno, the damaged life is kind of the inevitable outcome of living under late capitalism.
Okay.
It's not just about economic exploitation.
Right.
It's about the way the system actually colonizes our very souls.
Okay.
Shapes our desires, our values, even our perception of reality.
Okay, but isn't that a little dramatic?
Yeah.
I get that consumerism can be manipulative.
Sure.
But to say that our lives are, damaged seems a bit extreme. No.
Well, Adorno's not talking about some kind of superficial damage, right?
Okay.
He's talking about this fundamental alienation from ourselves, from each other, from the world around us.
Okay.
He argues that mass culture, with its constant cycle of production and consumption, creates this kind of false consciousness that keeps us trapped in a system that ultimately doesn't serve us.
So it's like we're so bombarded with these messages telling us what to buy, how to look, what to think, that we lose touch with what really matters.
Exactly. And this damage, it manifests itself in all these different ways.
Okay.
You know, from the conformity we see in fashion and trends to the lack of critical thinking that allows, you know, propaganda and misinformation to spread.
Right.
Adorno even saw it reflected in, like, the standardized products that we consume.
Okay.
Arguing that the sameness of mass-produced goods, it's like a reflection of this spiritual emptiness at the heart of modern life.
Yeah, he has this one line in Minima Moralia that really stuck with me. He says, "Leisure time is infected with the authoritarian urge for self-assertion."
Oh, that's a good one.
It's like even our free time, our hobbies, our attempts to just relax and enjoy ourselves, they're still shaped by these same forces that dominate the rest of our lives.
That's a perfect example, yeah. Adorno argues that this pressure to achieve, to succeed, to be constantly productive, even in our leisure time, it's a reflection of this, like, capitalist imperative to maximize profit. We're never truly free, even when we think we are.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this idea of the damaged life connects to his critique of mass culture.
Yeah.
His analysis of how capitalism shapes our desires and our values.
Right.
But how does all of this relate to his idea of negative dialectics?
Okay, good question.
I have to admit, that one's still a little abstract for me.
It is a challenging concept.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of the key to understanding Adorno's whole project, you know?
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about his rejection of these system-building philosophies?
Yeah, his critique of Hegel.
Exactly, like Hegel's attempt to create this grand narrative that explains everything.
Right, he felt like those systems were too rigid, too totalizing, that they ignored the complexity and contradictions of reality.
Absolutely, and that's where negative dialectics comes in.
Okay.
It's a way of thinking that actually embraces those contradictions. It refuses to settle for easy answers.
Right.
And it's constantly questioning our assumptions and pushing us to see the world from multiple perspectives.
So instead of trying to, like, force everything into a neat little box, it's about embracing the messiness, the ambiguity, the fact that we don't always have all the answers.
Exactly.
But how do you actually do that?
Well, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
How do you think negatively in a way that's productive and meaningful? It starts with recognizing that every concept, every system of thought, even our own beliefs and values, they're inherently limited. We need to be willing to kind of deconstruct these systems, expose their flaws and contradictions, and to try to see the world from the perspective of those who are, you know, marginalized or excluded.
So it's like, instead of trying to find the one right answer, it's about recognizing that there are always multiple perspectives, multiple truths, and that the process of seeking truth it's ongoing, it's never ending.
Exactly. And this is where Adorno's concept of thinking in constellations becomes essential. By assembling these different fragments of knowledge and experience, by listening to voices that are often silenced or ignored, we can create this more nuanced and complex understanding of reality.
Okay, I'm seeing how these ideas all kind of fit together now. It's like by embracing negative dialectics, by thinking in constellations, we can start to see the cracks in the system, the places where that damaged life is most visible.
Right.
And hopefully find ways to resist those damaging forces.
Precisely. And this is where Adorno's work becomes, you know, incredibly relevant to our own time. We live in a world that's saturated with information, ideologies, consumer products that promise happiness, but often deliver only this, like, fleeting satisfaction.
Right.
Adorno gives us the tools to critically examine those promises, to see through the illusions of mass culture, and to imagine alternative ways of being in the world.
This is making me think about the role of social media in our lives.
Oh, interesting.
You know, it's like, on the one hand,
it can be this amazing tool for connection, sharing ideas, building community.
Right.
But then on the other hand, it's also this platform for marketing, surveillance, the spread of misinformation, hate.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect example of how Adorno's ideas are still so relevant today. He helps us understand how technology, like any other tool, can be used for both good and evil.
Right, yeah.
And how it's up to us to really examine those uses.
Yeah.
And to resist the forces that want to, control and manipulate us.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling a lot more enlightened.
Good.
But also a bit overwhelmed.
That's understandable.
Like, Adorno's ideas are so dense.
Yeah, they're not easy.
So complex. It's like every time I think I've grasped one concept, another one pops up and challenges my whole understanding.
That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
His work isn't about providing easy answers or like this comforting worldview.
Right.
It's about constantly challenging us
Mm-hmm.
to think harder, to dig deeper, to never settle for the status quo. Yeah, and we've talked about his life, his influences, the damaged life, thinking in constellations, negative dialectics.
All right.
But we haven't even touched on his later work, his return to Germany.
That's true.
His big book, Negative Dialectics, or his controversial relationship with the student movement of the 60s.
Lots more to unpack.
Yeah, there's still so much to unpack.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
Okay.
As we delve into Adorno's legacy and explore how his ideas continue to challenge and inspire us today.
Okay, so we're back, and my brain's still kind of buzzing from our last deep dive into Adorno.
Yeah, he tends to have that effect.
Yeah, it's like he gives you these new lenses for seeing the world, but then everything looks kind of, unsettling.
It's a good way to put it. He doesn't really offer comfort,
No, not really.
More like a challenge.
Yeah.
And that challenge, it really intensifies in his later work.
Okay.
Especially after he returns to Germany in 1949.
Right, because on the surface, it's like, okay, the war's over, Nazis are defeated, you can go home.
Right.
But from these sources, I'm getting the sense it wasn't that simple for Adorno.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes back to Frankfurt, rejoins the Institute for Social Research, but he's deeply skeptical of this idea of just like a clean break with the past.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, hold on, the conditions that allowed fascism to rise, they're still here.
Right.
Just lurking beneath the surface.
And this is where his work on the authoritarian personality comes in, right?
Exactly.
This whole research project trying to understand the psychological roots of fascism.
Yeah, Adorno and his colleagues, they're trying to figure out, how did this happen?
Right.
How could seemingly ordinary people be drawn into this web of hate and violence?
Yeah.
And what they find is, well, it's disturbingly relevant to our own time.
Because they weren't just studying some historical anomaly.
Right.
They were trying to understand how those same patterns of thought,
that same susceptibility to authoritarianism could reemerge in different forms.
Absolutely. And this is the backdrop against which Adorno writes his big book, Negative Dialectics, published in 1966.
Yeah.
It's a dense book, I'm not going to lie.
No, I've heard.
But it's also his attempt to create this, intellectual toolkit, for resisting the forces of totalitarianism, conformity, and what he saw as the spiritual emptiness of late capitalism.
So from what I'm gathering,
Yeah.
Negative Dialectics is like the culmination of all these ideas we've been discussing.
It brings it all together.
Thinking in constellations, the critique of the Enlightenment, the damaged life, his relentless questioning of everything.
It's all there, but it's also where he takes that whole negative thinking thing to a whole new level.
Okay.
He's not just critiquing specific systems or ideologies.
Right.
He's trying to develop a whole new way of thinking, a way of being in the world that can break free from those oppressive systems. But isn't that kind of, paradoxical?
How so?
Isn't he still creating a system?
No.
Even if it's a system of negativity, how can you have a method for rejecting all methods?
That's the brilliance of it,
Okay.
Adorno knows he can't escape the trap of language, of concepts, of systems altogether.
Yeah.
But what he can do is constantly deconstruct those systems,
Okay.
expose their limitations, and show how they can be used to dominate and control.
So it's like he's saying, look, I know I'm using words, I'm using concepts.
Yeah.
But don't mistake these for the thing itself.
Right.
Always be skeptical. Always be questioning, even your own assumptions.
Exactly. And that's why Negative Dialectics is so difficult to read.
Right.
It's not like a linear argument. It's more like a series of probes, explorations, attempts to grapple with these really fundamental questions without ever settling for easy answers.
In one of the sources you gave me, there's this quote from Negative Dialectics that really stood out. Adorno says, "The splinter in your eye is the best magnifying glass."
Oh, that's a great one.
What do you think he means by that?
It's such a powerful image, right?
Yeah.
He's saying, don't look for these grand theories.
Okay.
Don't try to impose some predetermined order on the world.
Right.
Look at the things that irritate you, that don't fit,
Yeah.
that make you uncomfortable. That's where truth hides.
So it's like the things that bother us, the things we try to ignore or explain away, those are actually the most revealing, the most important to pay attention to.
Exactly. And this is where that whole thinking in constellations idea becomes like an ethical practice.
Okay.
It's about being attentive to the fragments, the details, the things that don't fit into our neat little categories, because those are the things that point to the cracks in the system.
Yeah.
The places where that damaged life is most visible.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly dense and challenging book,
Yeah.
Negative Dialectics, which is like the peak of Adorno's negative thinking project.
You could say that.
But he wasn't just writing in isolation, was he?
No, definitely not.
He was engaged in all these public debates.
Oh, yeah, he loved a good debate.
Yeah, clashing with other intellectuals.
Absolutely. One of the most famous was his debate with Karl Popper.
Oh, right.
Another really influential philosopher, but coming from a very different perspective.
Yeah, Popper was all about open societies, individual liberty, the scientific method.
Right. He saw the Frankfurt School as being too focused on these grand narratives.
Okay.
Too skeptical of reason, too pessimistic about the possibility of progress.
So it's like Popper saying, look, we need to focus on individual freedom, building institutions that protect that freedom and using reason to solve problems.
Right.
And Adorno's like, hold on, you're ignoring the power of social structures, the ways that capitalism itself limits freedom, and how reason can be used for oppression just as easily as liberation.
It was a clash of titans, really. And it's a debate that's still relevant today, you know? How do we balance individual liberty with social justice?
Right.
How do we use reason without falling into the trap of totalitarianism?
Yeah, big question.
These are the questions that Adorno forces us to confront.
And speaking of confronting uncomfortable truths, we can't talk about Adorno's later years without mentioning his relationship with the student movement of the 60s.
Oh, right. That's a whole other chapter.
Yeah, it was complex, often contentious.
Definitely. I mean, on the surface, you'd think Adorno, this lifelong critic of authority, would be a natural ally to these student rebels, right?
Right. They're questioning everything, demanding radical change.
Yeah, taking to the streets.
Yeah.
But Adorno was also deeply skeptical of their tactics, their embrace of revolutionary violence, their what he saw as a kind of romanticized view of revolution.
So it's like he agreed with their goals.
To an extent.
But not necessarily their methods.
Yeah, he saw the potential for their actions to backfire, you know, to create even more chaos and suffering.
And this tension came to a head in 1969, right?
It did, when students occupied the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt.
Oh, wow.
Adorno, who was the director at the time, he actually called the police to evict them.
Really?
It was a huge scandal, and it really alienated him from a lot of people on the left.
Wow, that's intense. So even when faced with a movement that seemed to align with a lot of his own critiques, he still couldn't abandon that commitment to negative thinking.
Right.
His refusal to embrace any ideology uncritically.
And that's what makes him such a challenging and important figure. You know, he's not giving us a blueprint for revolution. He's not offering us a comforting worldview.
Right.
He's giving us a set of tools for thinking critically, for questioning everything, for never settling for those easy answers.
So at the end of this deep dive, I'm left with this feeling of, like, Adorno has given me all these new ways of seeing the world, but he hasn't actually given me any solutions.
And isn't that a more honest approach?
Yeah, maybe.
To say, look, the world is complex. There are no easy answers.
Right.
But here are some ways to think about those complexities, to grapple with those contradictions, to maybe, just maybe, find a path towards a more just and humane future.
You know, I think that's what makes Adorno so relevant today.
Yeah.
Even if he can be frustrating at times.
I agree.
He's not giving us a roadmap, he's giving us a compass.
That's a great way to put it.
It's up to us to find our own way.
Exactly. And that journey of critical thinking, of questioning everything, of never settling for the status quo, that's the legacy of Adorno that we need to carry forward.
Well, that was quite a journey.
It was, wasn't it?
Thanks for guiding us through the world of Theodor W. Adorno.
Anytime.
I have a feeling we'll be revisiting his ideas for a long time to come.
Oh, for sure.